very much. I wanted to ask Dr. Hauchman specifically about data that EPA may have collected since 1970s on hydraulic fracturing. It's, a lot of the talk about hydraulic fracturing and the effects that it may have on groundwater and contamination have been, pretty recent. It wasn't something that you heard talked about, previous to, some of the discoveries in the Barnett Shale and what have you. What sort of data do you have on what hydraulic fracturing may do to groundwater previous, or going back to the 1970s?
Thank you for your question. I do not personally know the answer to your question. I have not been scouring the literature for that very information, but we will in fact do just that as we prepare our report for 2014.
Okay, good. I think that, having that may help, clear up, many of the conversations that we have here. And one of the other things I want to ask you, to mitigate some of these concerns that people have dealing with groundwater and the environment and what have you, what recommendations have EPA, made for what producers should do or what municipalities should do with this, sort of new natural gas that many people are finding?
I'm not prepared to answer your question, but be happy to get back to you with the answers.
Okay.
For the record.
Good deal. And I wanted to ask the experts from Utah specifically, I believe that was Mr. Rogers. Wanted to ask you what sort of, techniques, devices, have you seen in the last couple of years that would help, mitigate some of the concerns that people have as it relates to, these issues that we're talking about today, dealing with hydraulic fracturing and contaminants that may, be released into the environment?
Well, as I spoke earlier, we have a new rule, but the rules take into account things that we've been doing for years. Wellbore integrity, I think, is the most critical part of this, and so we ensure that wellbore is designed correctly to protect groundwater. We also have tightened up our disposal rules so that any disposal, any kind of produced water is protected from the environment, and they're looked at on a regular basis. So we look at that.
Is there something that you feel that the industry can be doing to help with some of these concerns that may be costly, and maybe some producers don't want to implement those safeguards just because they're costly? Is there anything out there that you think is is out there and available, but it's just not being used because some people think that maybe it's too costly?
I don't believe so. A hydraulic fracturing operation is very expensive, and so they're not going to cut corners just to do that. It's very expensive. A very large investment to even drill that well can be millions of dollars, so they're not going to cut corners on that end to possibly damage the environment. So I see them doing all they can. Right now, I think probably the most beneficial thing the industry could do is education and teaching people about hydraulic fracturing rather than the rhetoric we see out there and the fear that is passed on there. To actually understand what it is would be critical for people to know about. So once you understand it, you realize the risk is not as severe as what you read about.
Are there any recommendations that have been made to you specifically that you can think of that maybe you don't agree would help with the environmental concerns, but but the recommendations have been made from you, perhaps from, the environmental community?
The thing we did respond to was to have a disclosure rule, which we responded to. That was a few years in the coming, but we did that. So I think disclosure puts people's minds at ease, and to use the fracfocus.org is an exceptional website that can give you a lot of education, and you can actually look on and see what is being done in that particular well in your area throughout the country.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll back on time.